Thank you. Thank you for having me. You might not want to have me back after a little bit, but I'm glad that I'm here now. So you guys have been doing the same series as us. We've been looking at sacrifice and praise, and I don't know about you, but I have found it to be such an inspiring series. The idea of sacrificial praise isn't a new one to me, but actually unpacking it in this way has been really helpful. If you haven't been around for the last couple of weeks, I'll just unpack a little bit of what we've done, because what I'm about to say follows on directly from the last 3 sermons as well. We started off by looking at atonement, which is a really big word for the idea that a sacrifice is often needed to cover our sin. We acknowledge that we are not worthy, we are not good enough to come into God's presence. And so in the Old Testament, we saw that they were asked to sacrifice animals, to offer all kinds of different sacrifices in order to atone for their sin. The atonement was then a covering for their sin. It was a security. It was something that actually meant that they could then come into God's presence. They could know him. After that, we journeyed with Abraham and Isaac in Genesis 22, and looking at the fact that actually Abraham trusted God. He knew that he was a good God, and so even though God was asking him to sacrifice the most precious thing, the thing that was the best gift from God, Abraham still trusted God. He still went through the motions and saw that at the end, again, it was confirmed just how good God was. And then finally, you've had a look last week, I believe Ben shared all about Jesus' sacrifice. And the fact that we don't have to offer sacrifices like they did in the Old Testament, because Jesus has done it for us. Through dying on the cross, he has atoned for our sin, and through resurrecting, he has given us new life and new joy. What good news, right? Yes, good news. Okay, as you heard earlier, I am a youth worker, and so I do like a bit of response. I will pause. I'm also from a slightly Pentecostal background, so if you want to say amen every now and then, also appreciated. You are allowed, Becky. It's allowed. So, today what we're going to be looking at is the fact that we are also asked to be living sacrifices. But, as I've just said, if Jesus has done it all, if he has said through his actions that we don't need to offer sacrifices anymore, we are now accepted, we are now forgiven, we are now loved, why on earth do we live as living sacrifices? Why does it talk about that so much in the New Testament? And what is going on there? So, firstly, we are living sacrifices not out of necessity. It's not because God needs us to offer sacrifices anymore, but it's because we want to or we choose to. God gives us an invitation to participate with him. And by that, we are joining with Jesus. In Romans 12, it says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." There is an invitation there. It says in the very words, I offer. You can offer your bodies as living sacrifices. Because you see, God is a gentleman. He's not going to force us to sacrifice ourselves. He's not going to ask us to sacrifice our humanity or to degrade ourselves. But actually what he's saying is, if you will want to participate with me, if you want to go deeper into this relationship with me, then here's an opportunity. You can offer yourself as living sacrifices. He doesn't manipulate us. He lovingly invites us into relationship with him. And the second part of those 2 verses, in verse 2, it says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." When we offer ourselves as living sacrifices, God invites us to do this because he knows that when we do it, we can be transformed from the inside out. When we set aside our own agendas, our own desires, our own will, we can be transformed from the inside out. We can know new life. We can know something new. We can know something different. Moving on, it then says, "Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing and perfect will." I love those words. At first, when I read that, I was like, what on earth does that mean? I remember coming across this when I was much younger and just being like, I'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. Test and approve what God's will is. Right. Do I not just know that because it's in the Bible? But the way that I kind of view this is by looking at human relationships as well. Because the closer that I get to somebody else, the more that I know them. And the more that I know them, the more that I understand what kind of their motivations are, what's happened before that means they may be behaving in certain ways and things like that. And it's true with God as well. As I offer myself as a living sacrifice, I get closer to him. And as I get closer to him, I know him better. I know his character better. Setting aside my own wants means that I'm able to just go, God, I want to know you. And knowing him more means that I understand more what his will is. What it means when we sing, God, will your kingdom come? Because I understand what his kingdom looks like, because I know him. It's so important that we actually discover that when we choose to offer ourselves and say, do you know what? My own desires don't matter anymore, God. I want to come in line with you. That invitation means that we get to know so much more of the God who did all of that for us. We don't need to do it. He doesn't need anything from us. He doesn't ask us to live as living sacrifices because he needs something. He needs us to be his hands on the earth. He does it because he wants us to know him more. He wants that closeness of relationship. He wants us to be in that kind of loving friendship with him. And it's mirrored in our relationships here on earth as well. Because during my short time here on this earth, I have learned that often healthy relationships involve some kind of sacrifice. And when I was preparing for this talk, Ben was trying to inspire me, and he was saying, come on, you're newly married. You love Scott. You must sacrifice things for him. And I kept saying, no, I don't think I do, actually. And I got really panicky because I started to think, do I not love him enough? Am I supposed to be doing, like, what does that look like? And I found it really hard to think of daily things that I sacrifice for the man that I love. So what I did was I asked a higher authority. I asked Google. I said, Google, does love lead to sacrifice? And interestingly, some websites were trying to argue that you don't need to sacrifice if you're in love. Actually, all you need to do is compromise. You just meet somebody in the middle and that's good enough. But the more reliable sources, and there are reliable sources on the internet, believe it or not, but the more reliable sources, including websites like Psychology Today, there was another one that was like really, I can't think of what it was. But anyway, more reliable sources were saying, actually, compromise is important, but even more important is sacrifice. In a healthy, loving relationship, you will need to sacrifice something, because when you love someone, you're willing to give up something. So I thought, okay, well, I know that I love Scott, and I know that somehow I probably do give up stuff for him. I just can't think what it is, apart from maybe not having peanut butter in the house. But anyway, I was thinking, so what can I relate this to? What does that look like in my life? And what I thought of was The West Wing. It's a bit of a dated reference. The West Wing, if you don't know it, was created in 1999. I was not old enough in 1999 to watch it originally, but in my teenage years, I discovered The West Wing, which is a programme that is all about the American political system, and it follows these incredible characters for 7 seasons. It's a commitment, but honestly, it's worth it. It's worth it. If you haven't watched it, watch it. It's amazing. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, do you know what? There are some characters in The West Wing that, honestly, I know that they're not real. You know, hear me, it's okay, guys, I know they're not real. But I've realised that actually I like them. And because I like them, if I had the chance, if they were real, and if I had the chance, I would do anything to spend some time with them. Anything. Because these characters are amazing. There's President Jed Bartlett, who just knows so much. He's so wise. And he often acts with a lot of integrity. He's a human. Well, he's not a human, but he's a character that's supposed to be a human. So he does make mistakes. It's not always that he makes the right choices, but a lot of the time, yes, Lord? No. A lot of the time he behaves with integrity, and the way that he knows so much is so attractive to me that I just want to be near someone like that. And the more that I thought about it, the more that I realised there are so many people in my life who when I've chosen to like them and when I've chosen to love them, I'd do anything just to spend time with them, which sometimes means laying aside my own agenda in order to go and see them. There have been many times that I have sacrificed an afternoon nap to go and see my friends. And the more that you get to know Scott and I, the more that you'll know that is a really big deal for me. Really big deal for me. There have been many times that maybe I haven't wanted to do anything that's particular. Well, in fact, there's a lot of the times during the winter I just don't want to leave the house. because it's cold and it's dark, but because I love people and because I know that actually when I spend time with people and when I choose to put them first, I gain something myself. Not selfishly, but just out of relationship. I will sacrifice my own desire to stay warm in order to go out and see someone. This morning, you wouldn't know it now, but we travelled through sleet and snow and over fell and field just to be here this morning. It was snowing. It was snowing because we wanted to be here, because we like you guys. We don't know you very well yet, but we're willing to. And I'm sure the West Wing's a bit of an odd example. And actually, you might be someone sitting here this morning thinking, actually, I feel quite isolated at the moment. I don't have many of those relationships. But whether it's an actual real person or whether it's just someone you've seen on TV, I hope that you can in some way identify that feeling of, I don't know you yet, but actually I want to. And because I want to, I'd be willing to lay something aside to get to know them. Does that make sense? Yes, good. There's a few nods in the room. I also have this weird thing, and it's something that people often laugh about. Often if I'm at a conference or someone different comes to speak at church, or I just, you hear these stories about what's going on in the church around the world and around the UK. Sometimes I hear about someone and I just say, well, they're my friend. And it makes my friends laugh a bit because they're like, well, you've never actually spoken to Miriam Softfield, have you? And I haven't spoken to her. I don't know much about her, but actually I see something of what she carries. I see something of who she is, because of the way that she shares in front of thousands of young people. And I kind of go, yeah, she's my friend. Because, again, I want to know her. I love what I see of Jesus in her life. And because of that, if I had the chance, I would go and just sit at her feet. Physically just sit there while she did her thing and try and absorb so much. And the reason that I'm stressing this point so much is because the reason that we choose to live sacrificially, the reason that we offer ourselves, that we take up this invitation, is because of Jesus. It's because of what he did. It's acknowledging that when we take that moment to pause and see the act of a God who loved us so much that he sacrificed his own son's life in order to have relationship with us. What else can we do? It's the second part of that phrase. It's part of a lifestyle of praise. Our sacrifices are part of our worship because when we become into that place where we get to know God more, when we see his motivations, when we understand his will, when we know that he is good, we want to offer all that we can to be closer to him, to know him more, and so we live as sacrifices to that. Some of you are probably sitting there thinking, well, I know all this, but when I was preparing this, I did this talk last week at Rising Brecon, and so I've been preparing and thinking about it for a while, and I really think that there are some people who just, you're like, well, I know that, but you're almost just going through the motions, and even your service and part of what you do is going through the motions, and I feel like God wants to challenge you today to say, do you need to go back into that first love? Do you need to go back and read some of the scriptures and go back to the Gospels and fall back in love with Jesus? Read Hebrews, where it describes the fullness of what he's done for us and has some really inspiring examples of what this living sacrificially means. Fall back in love with him and then have this chance to reevaluate. Use Lent, which is the season of reassessment, of pausing, of thinking about where we stand, and reevaluate, what is a sacrifice for me? Because I do think that even I was thinking about this, and I was thinking I get really comfortable with what I do, even when it's service, because you do the same thing, but it's important that we still see that as a sacrifice, whether it's our time, whether it's our talents, whether it's our money, that we still acknowledge that actually, God, I need to fall back in love with you, because I don't want to just do this because it's what needs to be done. I want to do it, and I want to do it because I want to see your kingdom come. I want to do it because I want to get to know you better. I want to do it because when I do that thing, the veil between heaven and earth gets a bit thinner and I get to sense more of your presence. And I wish that every time I was putting out chairs in church, that was the experience that I had. It isn't always. Sometimes I'm literally just doing it because nobody else will. But actually, I don't want to do that. I want to be in that place where putting out chairs is something that brings me closer into relationship with the God who loves me. It gives me more of an idea of what he did in this. You see, Paul wrote in Philippians 3, verses 7 and 8, I've got it on the screen as the Passion Translation. He says, "Yet all of the accomplishments that I once took credit for, I've now forsaken them, and I regard it all as nothing compared to the delight of experiencing Jesus Christ as Lord. To truly know him meant letting go of everything from my past and throwing all my boasting into the garbage heap. It's all like a pile of manure to me now, so that I may be enriched in the reality of knowing Jesus Christ and embracing him as Lord in all his greatness." I want to be in that place. I want to live like that. I want to be able to know every day that when I wake up, all of my past means nothing. Everything's been forgiven. It's a blank slate. It's a new start. And I can run into all that God has for me. And that means that it doesn't matter what I've got planned. I've got loads of bits of paper here with writing on them. I'm not really saying anything that's on them because I want to get out of the way. I want to get out of the way and I want God to do his thing. So it doesn't matter what I've got planned. I want him to come. That's not to say that planning and preparation aren't a good thing. They are a good thing and God is in those details. But at the end of the day, if I can take time to just say, "God, will you use me today? Whatever I want to do, what my desires are." I know that some of them are good and some of them are you, but I also know that some of them just need to be thrown aside. I want it to count as nothing because I want to be running for your glory. When we sang earlier, we're running into his arms. I love that chorus because I'm quite a visual person, and so when we see that, I literally see arms open wide. And it's always sunny because I like the sunshine. So it's always sunny when I'm with God in my mind. But you can see this invitation to run towards him. And I kind of had this picture of, actually, as we are running towards God, as we're running into his arms, all of the stuff that is stuck to us, all of the commitments, the expectations of other people, the things that we think are really important, like whether or not we've got the right TV or, I don't know, whether moving house, all of those things that clog up our mind, I saw them just falling away. And there are some things that we were holding on to, which could be relationships, they could be past hurt, they could be things that, you know, when you're planning a wedding, oh my goodness, you hold on to so much. And I just saw them, like literally, because you're focused on what you're running towards, you're throwing everything off because you want to get there as quickly as you can, and I want to get there quicker. And so I want to be lighter. I want that stuff to be gone so that I can run into his arms. And to me, that's what living sacrificially looks like. I'm not going to stand here and tell you what that means for you, because for every one of us, that will be different. We all have different situations. We all have different family situations, different life situations. Some of us at work, some at school, some at home. Everything is different for each of us. And so I'm not going to stand here and be like, well, living sacrificially means giving this amount of hours per week to the church, giving this amount of hours to the community. No, that's not what I'm here to do. What I am here to do is to say, when we choose to remember that God has put out this invitation to us to live sacrificially, first of all, we need to remember that it's not a must do. He is not commanding us, live sacrificially, give up your life and follow me. What he's saying is, if you want to know the best of me, then give up something of yourself. And he does it in a time that will honour us. Like I said at the very beginning, he's a gentleman. When I was talking to someone after the service last week, she kept on saying to me, but I'm afraid. And I again, very visual, had this image of it literally being a step at a time to get closer. And not having to sacrifice everything all at once, but maybe just be willing to look at that thing that's been getting in the way. And then once you've looked at it, being able to let go of a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. I've completely lost my way. Hang on one second. Okay, so what the great news is, I'm not going to tell you what you need to do. I'm going to talk about how great what Jesus did, how important it is that we're willing to get into that place where we fall in love again. How important it is that in order to know God more, we're willing to sacrifice our own agendas, our own desires, and our own wills. Because actually, when we do that, my experience is, when I get out of the way and say, God, would you come? I want to give myself to you today in all that I do. My experience is that I become more of the Maddy that he made me to be. I become more of the humans that were originally intended because I'm in that close relationship with him. And like I said, that veil between heaven and earth becomes thinner and I get to know him more. And I have I've never found that it leads me into a dangerous place. That it leads me into somewhere that ends up being with me on the floor in tears. If I am on the floor in tears, it's often because I'm just overwhelmed by how good he is. It's good tears, it's not tears of pain. And actually what I found is where that pain has been before, there's healing and there's redemption. Because he chooses to make all things new. And I love it in Romans 8 verse 11. I'm talking a lot from Romans today. That's also a really good book of the Bible. It says that actually we receive resurrection life, because that's the great promise. The promise is that actually if we choose to offer ourselves as living sacrifices, then just as Jesus sacrificed himself and then was born again, he rose back to life. We rise back to life with him and we receive resurrection power. I don't have this on my notes, so I'm just going to turn my back to you to read it out loud. It stands to reason, doesn't it, that if the alive and present God who raised Jesus from the dead moves into your life, he'll do the same thing in you that he did in Jesus, bringing you alive to himself. When God lives and breathes in you, and he does, as surely as he did in Jesus, you are delivered from that dead life. With his spirit living in you, your body will be alive as Christ's. Once we accept the invitation to join with Jesus in living sacrificially, we get so much more than we could have ever bargained for, because we have the same power living in us that rose him from the dead. We can know healing, we can know freedom, we can know just the goodness of God in the everyday. What I found is it's, and we're doing this soon with some of the children that we work with, it's like everything that was once black and white becomes technicolor again. Because actually when we choose to live as sacrifices and to say, God, what I want doesn't matter, but actually bring to what yours, all of those fine details that were a little bit annoying or weren't quite fitting into place or didn't make any sense, sometimes they still don't make any sense, but God's presence brings it alive. You find the beauty in the really small things. And that is an amazing way to live. One thing that I am just going to touch on it, because there are still ways that we choose to symbolise this as a church body as well. And so while I'm not going to say each of you needs to go and live this way to be sacrificial, what I can say is there are things that we do as a whole church body that demonstrate this and that remind us of this. And the first one is baptism. So we believe in full immersion baptism. We do it out of obedience because actually it's what Jesus did and it's what he demonstrated us to do. But also it is a great visual, public, amazing demonstration of I'm choosing to live like you say, Jesus. Because what we do is as we step into the water, we are choosing to go under the water, leave all of our sin and our shame and all of the things of the past behind. Just like Paul said, it's all nothingness. So I'm going to leave it behind in the water. And then we come up out of the water and we are rising again into new life. Now, it's not because there's anything special in that water. It's not because it's anything more than just Staffordshire tap water. It is just Staffordshire tap water. But what it is a moment where we choose to identify publicly with Jesus' sacrifice. And so if you haven't been baptised, I've got no idea whether you're doing it soon as a church or not, but have a chat with Ben and Katie or someone in your small group about it, because if you are ready to make that commitment and to say, Jesus, I want to live like you lived, I want to give my all to follow you, then baptism is a way that we can do that publicly. And although, like I said, there's nothing really very special about that water, when I got baptised, I was quite young, I was 16, and it was in the sea, so there's really nothing special about that water. It was very cold. But what I then knew going forward into actually a really tricky season of my life was that God was with me, that I had publicly declared, that I acknowledged that he had given all for me, and that wherever I can, I'm going to choose to give all for him. And so I'm going to trust him, even in the really tricky stuff. I then knew in these 2 years of my life that were horrendous, otherwise known as sixth form, that God's with me. He's promised that, and I've promised to live with him. And so I can be strong in that. So again, if you haven't been baptised, then do have a chat to someone. And I know that last week you celebrated communion as well, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but just to say that again, that is an act that we do as remembrance of joining with Jesus in his sacrifice. It is a joyful, thankful act that when we break that bread, just as he said in Matthew 26, we remember him. We remember him. And as we drink of the wine, we remember the blood that washed us clean, that our sins have been atoned for, that we can be filled and receive new life in that moment. And so I want to encourage you that over this series of Lent, Katie and I were talking about this morning, that actually you don't have to be in this building or any particular one in order to have communion, in order to have communion. If you are with your small group and actually you're just sharing food together, you can have a moment of communion. If you're with your family and all of you have acknowledged Jesus in some way, then you can have a moment of communion during the midweek where you just take time to joyfully and thankfully remember all that Jesus has done with us and say again to him, I want to join with you in living sacrificially. It's a good thing to do. It's an exciting thing to do. And it's been a bit of a whirlwind this morning, mainly because, like I said, I kind of knew that I was going to completely ignore what was in front of me here and just say what was on my heart. But I just want to draw you back to some of those key points, that actually God is standing there with open arms. And maybe you need to be someone who, instead of trudging and looking down at the floor with everything that's hindering you and holding you down, you need to take a moment this morning to look up and to see that invitation in front of you. And that when you look up and see that, the things that are surrounding you, the things that are weighing you down, they will seem smaller. You may not be ready straight away to let go of it all, but actually he will quite happily help you with that step by step. And if that's something that you are actually really, really struggling with this morning, then I want to encourage you again. Speak to Ben or Katie, speak to someone in a small group, get into community where people can support you with that. They can support you with the things that are holding you down. The other thing to remember is that actually when we do choose to sacrifice, we don't do it out of obligation. Some of us might be in that place where we're doing it just because it's what we do and it's what needs doing. Again, go back to the Bible. Remember Jesus. Fall back in love with him. Fall back in love with the God who has given his all. Because when we do that, this lifestyle of praise, this lifestyle of sacrifice becomes so much easier. And again, we receive that promise of new life. We receive a new energy, a new joy, a new hope. And I'm just going to finish by reading Romans 12 again to you, but I'm going to read it in the Passion Translation again. I've said read a lot today. If you're not a fan of reading, then you can download the Bible app and it will tell you these things. It has a thing where it talks to you. You can do it in any translation, so things that are comfortable for you. I really recommend the Passion Translation if it's New Testament, because it's been translated into a more, I don't know, what would you say, descriptive? I think it's more descriptive and easy for us to accessible. Yeah, more passionate, some would say. And I've found a new poetry in the words in the New Testament because of this translation. If you're going to access one thing this morning that I've said, then go to Romans 12, because the second half of the chapter also has some real gold in there about what it means to love others, which essentially is what sacrificing is, isn't it? It's choosing to put others before yourself, which sometimes I do. So you might want to close your eyes when you're listening to this, just to let the words wash over you. Beloved friends, what should our proper response to God's marvellous mercies be? I encourage you to surrender yourselves to God, to be his sacred living sacrifices and live in holiness, experiencing all the delights of his heart. For this becomes your genuine expression of worship. Stop imitating the ideals and opinions of the culture around you, but be inwardly transformed by the Holy Spirit through a total reformation of how you think. This will empower you to discern God's will as you live in a beautiful life, satisfying and perfect in his eyes. Yes, Lord, I thank you that the invitation into relationship with you is not through anything that we do. It's not through us trying to make ourselves new or better. It's not through us offering sacrifices, but actually it's all through you, Jesus. We are accepted, we are loved, we are forgiven, we are made whole because of that act. And Lord, I just pray that you would help us to know more of you, to remember the glorious mercies that comes with. That actually as we worship, as we live in community, as we get to know each other and you more, that we would be overwhelmed by your grace, be overwhelmed by love for you, that we would fall back in love with you, and that would lead us to being willing to put aside our own things, to get out of the way and see more of your kingdom here, to see more of your resurrection life and your power in our everyday, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our homes, in our communities, in our families. Lord, let your kingdom come and your will be done. We pray. Amen.